When 24-year-old Ava Collins began live streaming from her small apartment 3 nights a week, she had fewer than 1,000 followers. She wasn't famous. She wasn't trying to become an influencer. Streaming was simply a way to earn a little extra money after work. Most nights, she sat at the same small desk. A second-hand webcam balanced on top of an aging computer monitor. A ring light illuminated the room just enough to hide the tiny apartment behind her. For 2 or 3 hours, she played games, answered questions from viewers, opened fan mail, talked about work, complained about bills, then logged off. It was simple, comfortable, and predictable. Among the hundreds of usernames that drifted in and out of her chat every week, one eventually became impossible to ignore. Daniel, 19. At first he donated $20. Ava smiled, thanked him, and continued talking to her audience. The following week, he donated $50. A month later it was $100. Soon Daniel wasn't simply watching every stream. He was funding them. When Ava casually mentioned that her laptop had begun freezing during broadcasts, Daniel bought her a new one. When she joked about surviving on instant noodles until payday, a food delivery arrived at her apartment less than an hour later. When she mentioned her rent had gone up, Daniel quietly transferred enough money to cover the entire month. She laughed about it on stream. So, apparently I have the nicest viewer on the internet. Her chat exploded. Marry him. Protect Daniel at all costs. Where do we find fans like this? Ava laughed. It's just Daniel. No one thought much of it. After all, generous supporters weren't unusual. Every successful streamer had one or two. Besides, Daniel never crossed the line. He never demanded attention. Never asked inappropriate questions. Never made threats. If anything, he seemed unusually polite. Whenever Ava thanked him for another donation, he'd always respond with exactly the same message. Seeing you smile is enough. It sounded harmless, maybe even sweet. Looking back, detectives would later identify those 6 words as the first warning, not because of what they meant, but because Daniel wrote them. Every single time. For nearly 6 months, their interactions never extended beyond the live stream. Daniel donated. Ava thanked him. The stream ended. Life went on. Then one evening just before ending her broadcast, Ava noticed a private message waiting in her inbox. It was from Daniel. She hesitated. Normally, she ignored direct messages from viewers. But Daniel wasn't like everyone else. He had never made her uncomfortable. He had never been disrespectful. He had helped her more times than she could count. So against her better judgment, she opened it. I hope this isn't inappropriate. I just wanted to say I'm really proud of you. Watching your streams has become the best part of my week. Thank you for making lonely nights feel a little less lonely. Ava smiled. It was unexpectedly sincere. She replied with 3 simple words. Thank you, Daniel. It took less than 30 seconds. She closed the chat, turned off her computer, and went to bed. To Ava, it was nothing more than a polite conversation with one of her biggest supporters. To Daniel, it was the first private message he'd ever received from the woman he had spent the last 6 months thinking about every single day. He took a screenshot of it, then another. He backed it up onto his computer, printed a copy, and carefully placed it inside a folder. On the front he wrote one word: Ava. The private messages began innocently. At first, Daniel only wrote after her live streams. Sometimes to compliment her latest broadcast. Sometimes to ask about a game she'd played. Sometimes simply to wish her good night. Ava didn't answer every message. She couldn't. Working a full-time job while streaming 3 nights a week left very little free time. But every now and then, she'd reply. Sometimes with a single sentence. Sometimes with an emoji. Sometimes with nothing more than, hope you're doing well too. To Ava it was customer service. To Daniel it was conversation. Over the following months, those conversations became longer. Daniel learned that Ava hated coffee but loved hot chocolate. That she listened to true crime podcasts while cleaning her apartment. That she'd wanted to become a journalist before settling for an office job. He remembered every detail. Not because he had an exceptional memory but because he wrote everything down. Detectives would later recover dozens of notebooks from Daniel's apartment. Each one neatly dated. Each one documenting conversations with Ava. What she'd eaten. What movies she liked. When she had headaches. What time she usually went to bed. Even the names of people she'd mentioned in passing. Most people forget conversations. Daniel archived them. As the months passed, the gifts became more extravagant. Designer handbags. Concert tickets. The latest smartphone. When Ava refused, Daniel insisted. Please. You deserve nice things. It makes me happy. Eventually she stopped arguing. She thanked him, accepted the gifts, and promised she'd pay him back someday. Daniel always gave the same answer. You don't owe me anything. At least that's what he said. Looking back, psychologists who later reviewed the case believed something else was happening beneath the surface. Every gift was quietly becoming another piece of evidence in Daniel's mind. Not evidence that Ava owed him money, evidence that they were building a life together. Because in Daniel's version of reality, couples helped each other. Couples bought each other presents. Couples supported one another. Every transfer, every gift, every late-night conversation only confirmed what he already believed. The relationship wasn't becoming more serious. It already was. Ava simply hadn't said it out loud yet. Then 9 months after their first private conversation, Daniel asked a question he'd been rehearsing for weeks. Would you like to have dinner together sometime? Ava stared at the message. She'd known this day would eventually come. She genuinely liked Daniel. He had never been rude, never pressured her, never made her feel unsafe. But she'd never intended for things to become personal. She carefully typed a reply. I'd love to someday. Things are just really busy with work right now. Maybe after things calm down? Daniel smiled at his phone. He didn't see a rejection. He saw hope. Maybe. That single word became the promise he lived by. He marked the date in one of his notebooks. Underneath it, he wrote 5 words. She wants to meet me. It wasn't what she'd said, but it was exactly what he'd heard. For the next few months, nothing seemed unusual. Daniel continued watching every live stream. Ava continued thanking him for every donation. To anyone looking from the outside, it appeared to be another harmless friendship between a content creator and one of her biggest supporters. But something had quietly changed. Daniel no longer watched Ava's streams because he enjoyed them. He watched them because he wanted to know where she was. Every story she told, every passing comment, every complaint about work, every restaurant she visited, every weekend trip. He remembered all of it. Not intentionally. It simply became impossible not to. Whenever she mentioned trying a new cafe, Daniel searched for it online. When she talked about going hiking with friends, he looked up the trail. When she complained about traffic after work, he traced possible routes on Google Maps. It didn't feel strange to him. He told himself he was simply interested in her life. After all, isn't that what people in relationships do? One Friday evening, Ava uploaded a photograph to Instagram. Nothing unusual. She was sitting outside a small Italian restaurant. A plate of pasta sat in front of her. A glass of wine rested beside it. The caption simply read, "Much needed night out." Within seconds, Daniel liked the post. A minute later, he sent a message. "Looks nice." Ava replied, "It really is." Daniel smiled. Then he noticed something. Reflected in the restaurant window, barely visible behind Ava, was another person. You couldn't see a face, only part of a shoulder, and a man's wrist resting on the table. Daniel zoomed in, then zoomed in again. He stared at the image for several minutes. Finally he typed another message. "Who are you having dinner with?" Ava didn't answer. She had already put her phone away. An hour later, he asked again. "Family?" Still nothing. By midnight, there were 6 unanswered messages. "Everything okay? Did I upset you? Just curious. You don't have to answer if you don't want to." Then one final message. "I hope he's treating you well." The following morning, Ava finally replied. "Sorry, I was with friends." Daniel read the message 3 times. Friends, plural. Then why had she only photographed one plate? Why had she never mentioned anyone else arriving? His thoughts lingered on the reflection. It wasn't proof of anything. But once an idea enters an obsessive mind, it rarely leaves. That afternoon, for the first time, Daniel visited every public social media account Ava had ever created. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat. Even an old photography blog she hadn't updated in years. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He simply wanted to understand her life better. Hours turned into days. Days into weeks. By the end of the month, Daniel knew the names of people Ava had gone to college with. The coffee shop she visited before work. Her favorite hiking trail. The bookstore she tagged every few weeks. He could recognize her apartment building from photographs she'd posted years apart, even though she'd never once shared the address. None of it required hacking. None of it required illegal software. It only required patience, and Daniel had plenty of that. Ava had no idea anyone was paying that much attention. By the beginning of the second year, Daniel's life had settled into a routine. He woke at 6 every morning, worked until 5, ordered dinner from the same restaurant almost every evening. Then at exactly 7:30, he opened Ava's stream. It had become less of a hobby and more of a ritual. She streamed late, he waited. She canceled. His entire evening felt empty. If she ended early, he stayed awake scrolling through her old posts. Without realizing it, Ava had slowly become the center of Daniel's world. And somewhere along the way, he stopped thinking of himself as one of her viewers. In his mind, he had become something more. One Thursday evening, Ava ended her stream earlier than usual. "I'm exhausted tonight," she told her audience. "I think I'm just going to order food, watch a movie and sleep." The chat filled with messages wishing her a good night. Daniel smiled. He typed, "Good night, Ava." She smiled at the screen. "Good night, everyone." The stream ended. Daniel closed his laptop. Then 23 minutes later, a notification appeared. Ava had uploaded a story to Instagram. She wasn't at home. She was sitting inside a bowling alley, laughing, holding a milkshake. Daniel stared at the photograph. She'd said she was going home. Instead, she'd gone out. For the first time. Something about that bothered him. Not because she'd gone bowling. Because she'd lied. Or at least that's how it felt to him. He opened their messages. "Thought you were staying home tonight." No reply. An hour passed. Still nothing. At 10:41 p.m., she finally answered. "Ha! Oh, my friend dragged me out at the last minute." Daniel read the message twice. Then 3 times. His eyes stopped on one word. Friend. Not friends. Friend. He typed carefully. "Who?" The typing bubble appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, Ava replied. "Just someone from work." Daniel waited. She never said anything else. He looked back at the photograph. The reflection in the window showed another person sitting across from her. The figure was blurred. But it was enough. Enough for Daniel's imagination to fill in everything the picture didn't show. That night he barely slept. The following morning, he noticed something strange. A man had liked Ava's latest photograph. His profile picture showed him standing beside a motorcycle. Daniel clicked on the account. He wasn't trying to spy. At least that's not what he told himself. He simply wanted to know who he was. That became easier than he'd expected. Within an hour, Daniel knew the man's first name, where he worked, which city he lived in, even which bowling league he played in every Wednesday night. He closed the page, tried to convince himself he'd gone too far. Then he opened it again. For the rest of the day he checked that profile more often than his own email. It was the first time another person had made Daniel feel threatened. And that feeling would soon begin changing everything. At first it was subtle. A question here. A comment there. Small enough that Ava barely noticed. Whenever she posted a new photo, Daniel was always one of the first to comment. Whenever she mentioned meeting friends, he wanted to know who they were. Whenever she uploaded a picture from somewhere new, he asked how she'd found the place. Most of the time, she answered without thinking. Sometimes she ignored him completely. Daniel noticed both. One Friday evening, Ava uploaded another Instagram story. She was laughing with coworkers after finishing a difficult week. The video lasted only 8 seconds. But Daniel watched it 17 times. There were 4 people in the video. 2 women. 1 man and Ava. The man made everyone laugh. Ava playfully nudged his shoulder. That single gesture replayed over and over inside Daniel's head. Minutes later he opened their chat. "Who's the guy?" Ava didn't answer. She was still out. Half an hour later. Another message. "You've never mentioned him before." An hour passed. Still nothing. Then another. "Are you ignoring me?" When Ava finally got home, she sighed after seeing the notifications. She replied, "He's just someone I work with." Daniel answered almost instantly. "You looked pretty close." Ava frowned. "What?" "In the video. We're friends?" Daniel stared at the word. "Friends?" Again. Always friends. Always someone from work. Always someone she'd never mentioned before. He typed, "I just don't understand why you've never told me about him." Ava paused. Something about the conversation suddenly felt different. She'd never had to explain who she spent time with before. She laughed awkwardly and tried to lighten the mood. "Daniel? I don't give you updates on every person I know." The typing indicator appeared immediately. "So, you think I'm being unreasonable?" Ava hesitated. She didn't want to hurt his feelings. "No, I'm just saying. I have my own life outside streaming." Daniel read that sentence 3 times. My own life. For the first time. It felt like a wall had been placed between them. A wall he hadn't realized existed. He didn't reply. Not that night. Not the next day. Not even during her next livestream. His username, which had become as familiar to Ava as the opening music of her streams, never appeared. Her moderators noticed first. No Daniel tonight? Someone in chat joked. Guess he finally ran out of money? Ava laughed politely. I'm sure he's just busy. But privately, she wondered if she'd upset him. 3 days later, another notification appeared. Daniel had sent her flowers. Larger than any bouquet before. Inside was a handwritten card. I'm sorry if I overstepped. I just worry about you. I care more than you realize. Ava smiled. She genuinely believed he'd recognized he'd been a little too invested. She thanked him. Told him the flowers were beautiful. And just like that, things seemed normal again. Except they weren't. Because while Daniel had apologized, he hadn't stopped watching. He'd simply stopped asking. Instead, he started keeping the answers to himself. And that made him far more dangerous. The flowers seemed to fix everything. At least that's what Ava believed. Daniel stopped asking uncomfortable questions. He no longer wanted to know who she was having dinner with. He didn't ask about coworkers. He didn't ask why she hadn't replied. He simply became quiet. To Ava, that was a relief. She assumed he'd finally understood the boundaries she was trying to set. What she didn't know was that Daniel hadn't stopped looking for answers. He had simply stopped asking her. Every morning before work he checked all of Ava's social media accounts. Every lunch break he checked again. Every evening he watched her live stream. Every night before bed he went through her followers one by one, looking for unfamiliar names, new comments, new faces, patterns. Slowly he began noticing things that most people never would. The same woman appeared in several of Ava's photos. Different restaurants, different weekends, always smiling beside her. Daniel eventually learned her name. Emily, one of Ava's closest friends. Then there was another face, the coworker. His name appeared only once. Tagged in a group photo from an office Christmas party. Mark Reynolds. Daniel clicked on the profile. Private. He couldn't see much. But there was enough. His job. His city. Mutual friends. Over the next several weeks, Daniel found himself checking Mark's account almost as often as he checked Ava's. Not because he believed anything was happening. Because he needed to know if something could happen. The more he watched, the more ordinary moments began to feel suspicious. If Ava uploaded a picture from a cafe, Daniel searched to see if Mark had posted anything that day. If Ava mentioned working late, he wondered whether Mark had stayed late too. There was never any evidence they were together. None. But Daniel wasn't looking for proof anymore. He was looking for reassurance. And reassurance has a dangerous habit. The more you search for it, the harder it becomes to find. One evening, Ava was halfway through a live stream when her phone buzzed. She glanced down, smiled, then placed it face down on the desk. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Most viewers didn't even notice. Daniel did. For the rest of the stream, he couldn't concentrate on what she was saying. Who had texted her? Why had she smiled? Why hadn't she mentioned it? When the stream ended, he waited. 5 minutes. 10. 20. No reply to his goodnight message. Then nearly an hour later, Ava uploaded another Instagram story. She was walking home, headphones on, laughing at something behind the camera. Daniel stared at the screen. Someone else had filmed the video. Someone was walking beside her. Only an arm appeared briefly before the story ended. That night, Daniel opened a blank document on his computer. At the top he typed 4 words. People around Ava. Underneath, he began writing names. Emily, Mark, her manager, coworkers. Neighbors she'd mentioned. Even the barista who always remembered her coffee order. It wasn't a list of enemies. Not yet. It was simply everyone who occupied space in a life Daniel had begun believing should include him. Without realizing it, he had stopped seeing Ava as someone with her own world. Instead, he saw everyone else as obstacles standing between them. By spring, Ava's page was growing faster than ever. She had passed 5,000 followers. Brands had started reaching out. Small sponsorships became regular. She always thanked him. She was grateful. But something had started to change. Every gift felt heavier than the last. Whenever another expensive package arrived, she felt less excited and more uncomfortable. One evening she finally brought it up during a phone call. Daniel, you really don't have to keep buying me things. There was a long pause. I know. So why do you? Another pause. Because seeing you happy makes me happy. She smiled politely. But I feel bad. You shouldn't. I do. You've done so much for me. Daniel frowned. What have I done? Ava laughed softly. I mean, you've been there. You've supported me. You've listened whenever I've had a bad day. Daniel smiled. She had said it. Supported me, listened, been there. The words echoed in his mind long after the call ended. To Ava it was gratitude. To Daniel it sounded like acknowledgement. Like confirmation. Later that night, he opened one of his notebooks. Beneath the date, he wrote, "She finally admitted how much I mean to her." It wasn't what she'd said, but it was the version his mind chose to remember. A week later, Ava missed 2 scheduled streams. She posted a short message explaining she'd caught the flu. Most viewers wished her a speedy recovery. Daniel did something different. He ordered medicine, soup, tea, vitamin supplements. Everything was delivered to her apartment before sunset. Ava was stunned. She hadn't told him where she lived. Not directly. She'd only mentioned the name of her apartment complex months earlier while complaining about noisy renovations during a live stream. She'd laughed about it, forgotten it within minutes. Daniel hadn't. When she asked how he'd found the address, he answered almost casually, "You mentioned it once." She tried to remember. Eventually she convinced herself he was right. Maybe she had. Maybe she'd simply forgotten. Still something about it stayed with her. For the first time she wondered how much Daniel actually knew about her life. Not enough to be frightened. Just enough to make her uneasy. That evening she told Emily about it. Emily didn't laugh. Instead she asked a simple question. Has he ever met you? No. Has he ever video called you? A couple of times. And does he know where you work? Ava hesitated. I don't think so. Emily looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "Maybe stop telling him so much." It was the first time anyone had suggested that Daniel wasn't simply an overly generous supporter. Ava defended him. He's harmless. He just gets attached. Emily nodded. I hope you're right. Neither of them realized Daniel's attachment had already become something else entirely. And before long Ava would begin noticing that some coincidences weren't coincidences at all. At first they felt almost comforting. One rainy Tuesday morning Ava arrived at her favorite coffee shop before work. The line was unusually short. She reached for her purse. The cashier smiled. You're all set. Ava frowned. What do you mean? The gentleman before you paid for your order. She looked toward the door. The man was already gone. Did he leave a name? The cashier shook his head. No. He just said she'll know it's from a friend. Ava smiled to herself. Maybe it had been Emily. Maybe one of her viewers recognized her. She didn't think much of it. Until it happened again. 2 weeks later, lunch had already been paid for. A month after that flowers arrived at her office reception. No sender, no card. Only white lilies. Daniel's favorite flowers. She knew that because he'd once told her they reminded him of his mother. Ava picked up her phone. Daniel? Did you send flowers to my office? His reply came almost instantly. No. She stared at the screen. It wasn't unusual for Daniel to answer quickly, but something about the response felt prepared. Almost as though he'd been expecting the question. Life went on. Summer arrived. Ava streamed more often. Her audience continued growing. Daniel remained generous, polite, patient. He never mentioned meeting again. He never questioned her about other men. He never brought up the flowers. Everything felt normal. Until one Saturday afternoon. Ava and Emily spent the day shopping downtown. Around lunchtime, Emily stopped walking. Ava? What? I think we've seen that guy before. Ava looked around. Who? The man in the gray hoodie. Near the entrance of a bookstore, a man stood pretending to read something on his phone. His baseball cap covered most of his face. The moment Ava looked in his direction, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Probably nothing, Ava said. Emily wasn't convinced. 30 minutes later, they saw him again at a different store wearing the same hoodie and cap. Again he walked away the moment Ava noticed him. Emily's voice became quieter. Let's leave. They drove home. Neither mentioned it again. Because neither wanted to sound paranoid. 3 days later Ava posted a short vlog. Nothing unusual. She talked about work, mentioned trying a new restaurant. Showed a few clips from her weekend. Halfway through editing, she noticed something. In one of the background shots, a man wearing a gray hoodie crossed the street behind her. Only for a second. Too blurry to identify. She almost deleted the clip. Instead, she convinced herself it was a coincidence. People wore gray hoodies every day. Not everything meant something. That evening, Daniel sent her a message. I hope you enjoyed shopping with Emily. Ava froze. Her fingers stopped above the keyboard. She stared at the screen. She hadn't posted anything about shopping. Not yet. The vlog was still sitting in her editing software. She hadn't uploaded it. She slowly typed. How did you know I was shopping? Several seconds passed before Daniel replied. You mentioned wanting to go. She read the message again. It sounded reasonable. Maybe she had mentioned it. Maybe she'd forgotten. Lately she seemed to be forgetting a lot of little things. Still, for reasons she couldn't explain, she opened every conversation she'd had with Daniel over the past month. She searched one word. Shopping, and nothing came up. Not once had she mentioned going. She checked her live stream recordings. Nothing there either. Her heartbeat quickened. She looked back at Daniel's message. It was still sitting there. I hope you enjoyed shopping with Emily. For the first time, Ava didn't wonder whether Daniel was paying too much attention. She wondered how he knew where she'd been. For the rest of the day, Ava couldn't concentrate. She replayed the conversation over and over in her mind. There had to be an explanation. Maybe she'd mentioned shopping during a live stream and forgotten. Maybe Emily had posted something online. Maybe she was overthinking it. That evening she called Emily. Can I ask you something? Sure. Did you post anything from Saturday? Emily sounded confused. No. Nothing. I barely even took my phone out. Ava swallowed. What about tagging the stores? No. The restaurant? No. Silence. Emily finally asked. Why? Ava hesitated. Then she told her about Daniel's message. Another silence. Longer this time. Finally Emily spoke. Ava. I think you need to stop talking to him. I know. No. I'm serious. This isn't normal. Ava wanted to disagree. She wanted to defend him. Instead, she heard herself asking the question she'd been avoiding. What if he actually knows where I live? Emily didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was noticeably quieter. Then you need to go to the police. Ava didn't go. Not yet. Because what exactly would she report? A generous viewer had sent gifts. A message that felt a little too specific. A man in a gray hoodie she couldn't even identify. None of it was illegal. None of it proved anything. She convinced herself she needed evidence first. That decision would later become the biggest regret of her life. Over the next 2 weeks, the coincidences became impossible to ignore. One morning, Ava stopped at a grocery store she had never mentioned online. As she reached the checkout, the cashier smiled. The gentleman behind you already paid. She turned around. No one was there. Another time she finished work and walked toward her car. Fresh flowers rested beneath the windshield wiper. No note, no card. Just flowers. Then on a Wednesday evening, she changed her routine completely. Instead of driving home, she met Emily across town for dinner. A place she'd never visited before. Halfway through the meal, Emily suddenly stopped talking. Ava? What? Don't look. Ava looked anyway. Across the street, a man wearing a dark baseball cap stood beside a newspaper stand. He wasn't reading. He wasn't shopping. He was looking directly toward the restaurant. The moment Ava turned, he looked away. Emily grabbed her wrist. That's him. Ava felt her stomach drop. You've seen him before too? Emily nodded. I didn't tell you because I thought I was imagining it, but that's the same guy. They watched through the window. Within seconds he disappeared into the evening crowd. Neither woman finished dinner. That night, Ava made a decision. She blocked Daniel. Everywhere. Instagram, TikTok, Discord, WhatsApp. His phone number. Even his email. Then she sat on her couch staring at the television without really watching it. She expected anger. She expected dozens of fake accounts. She expected endless messages. Instead, nothing happened. The silence lasted a full week. No calls, no emails, no gifts, no flowers. Nothing. Emily smiled. I told you. He finally got the message. For the first time in months, Ava felt herself relax. She started sleeping better. She stopped looking over her shoulder every time she walked to her car. She even joked during one of her live streams. Looks like my biggest fan finally got bored. Her viewers laughed. The chat moved on. But somewhere someone else was watching that stream. Someone who didn't laugh. Someone who simply whispered to himself, I'll wait. Because in Daniel's mind this wasn't the end of their relationship. It was simply their first real argument. For the next 3 weeks Daniel vanished. It was exactly what Ava had wanted. At first she checked her blocked messages every morning, just to make sure he hadn't found another way to contact her. He hadn't. Emily kept reassuring her. He's moved on. You did the right thing. You don't owe him anything. Ava wanted to believe that. She really did. Gradually life began returning to normal. She streamed without worrying about who was watching. She accepted dinner invitations again. She laughed more. For the first time in nearly 2 years. Daniel wasn't occupying space in her thoughts. But Daniel had never stopped thinking about her. The day Ava blocked him, Daniel didn't become angry. He became convinced she was confused. He replayed every conversation they'd ever had. Every smile. Every thank you. Every late-night message. Every gift she'd accepted. He filled page after page trying to understand what had happened. One sentence appeared over and over again. Something changed her mind. Not she doesn't love me. Never that. In Daniel's mind someone had turned her against him. Someone had convinced her to block him. Someone had poisoned what they had built together. The answer could only be one person. Emily. Daniel stopped watching Ava's streams. Instead, he started watching everyone around her. Emily's social media. Her coworkers. Mutual friends. He wasn't looking for Ava anymore. He already knew enough about her. He was trying to identify who was pulling her away. Late one evening he saw a photograph Emily had posted. Nothing unusual. Just dinner with friends. But in the background Ava was laughing. Daniel stared at the image. Then he whispered, "There you are." He enlarged the photograph. A restaurant logo reflected in the window. A street sign outside. A clock on the wall. Within 30 minutes, he knew exactly where it had been taken. Not because he was brilliant. Because he'd spent years paying attention to details everyone else ignored. The following Saturday, Ava and Emily returned to the same restaurant. They had no reason to think otherwise. Halfway through lunch, Emily frowned. What? I think that guy's here again. Ava looked toward the entrance. A man sat alone near the back. Baseball cap. Dark jacket. Reading a menu. His face remained hidden. She looked away. When she glanced back, he was gone. Neither woman saw him leave. Neither noticed the small notebook he'd forgotten beneath the table. A waiter picked it up moments later. Assuming it belonged to one of the customers, he hurried outside. The man had disappeared. The notebook was eventually placed behind the counter. Forgotten. Until closing time. Curious, the restaurant manager opened it to look for a name. The first page was blank. The second contained only one sentence. Ava likes the corner table because she can watch the rain. The manager frowned. He turned another page. Ava always orders sparkling water first. Another. Emily is allergic to shellfish. Another. Ava laughs before she drinks. Another. The pages continued. Every visit. Every meal. Every conversation. Dates stretching back almost 8 months. The notebook didn't describe the restaurant. It described Ava. In painstaking detail. The manager's hands began to shake. He called the police. By the time officers arrived, the notebook had already become the first piece of physical evidence that someone wasn't simply watching Ava online anymore. Someone had been quietly watching her in real life. When detectives first examined the notebook, they assumed it belonged to someone with an unhealthy fascination. By the time they reached the final page, they realized they were looking at something much worse. Every entry followed the same pattern. Date, time, location. What Ava wore. Who she met. How long she stayed. Even what she ordered. Some observations were harmless. Ava smiled when the waiter complimented her jacket. Others were deeply unsettling. Ava looked over her shoulder twice before leaving. She still hasn't noticed me. Detectives counted nearly 200 separate entries. The oldest had been written almost 8 months earlier, which meant someone had been following Ava long before she ever blocked Daniel. The notebook was sent to forensic analysts. Fingerprints covered almost every page. Most belonged to restaurant staff. Only one complete set remained. When those prints were entered into the national database, a name appeared. Daniel Mercer. The same man who had spent nearly 2 years sending Ava expensive gifts. The same man she had blocked only weeks earlier. Detectives immediately requested a background check. Nothing stood out. No arrests, no restraining orders, no complaints, no history of violence. On paper Daniel Mercer looked like an ordinary citizen, which made the notebook even more disturbing. 2 detectives visited Ava the following morning. She expected questions about the flowers, the messages, the gifts. Instead, one of the detectives placed the notebook on her kitchen table. "Have you ever seen this before?" She shook her head. "No." He opened the first page. "You should sit down." For nearly 40 minutes, they turned page after page together. Ava's face slowly lost all color. She remembered almost every day described inside. The blue dress she'd worn to Emily's birthday. The bookstore she'd visited after work. The morning she'd spilled coffee on her jacket. Even the afternoon she'd stopped to pet a stranger's golden retriever. Moments she'd forgotten had been carefully recorded by someone else. Then she reached one entry that made her breathing stop. Saturday, 3:17 p.m. Ava cried inside her car for 11 minutes before driving home. She remembered that day. She had argued with her mother over the phone. She'd pulled into an empty parking lot, locked the doors, and cried. She had told no one. Not Emily. Not her coworkers. Not even her live stream audience. She looked up at the detectives. He was there. Neither detective answered. They didn't need to. Within hours, police obtained a warrant to search Daniel's apartment. What they found inside would later become one of the most disturbing collections of evidence either detective had encountered. At first glance, the apartment looked perfectly ordinary. Everything was spotless. Books arranged neatly on shelves. Clothes folded with military precision. Not a single dirty dish in the sink. Nothing suggested the man living there was dangerous. Until detectives opened the spare bedroom. The room contained no bed. No furniture, only shelves. Hundreds of labeled binders. Plastic storage boxes, hard drives. And one wall covered entirely with photographs of Ava. Some had been downloaded from social media. Others had clearly been taken without her knowledge. Walking to work, shopping, reading alone in a cafe, waiting for a traffic light, standing outside her apartment building. Each photograph had a handwritten date beneath it. Some also included times, weather conditions, and short notes. Looked tired. Smiled at an elderly woman. Didn't finish her lunch. One detective later admitted, the room felt less like a shrine, and more like someone trying to document the life of a person who never knew she was being observed. Then they opened the closet. Inside sat dozens of unopened gifts. Designer handbags, jewelry, perfume, birthday cards, Christmas presents, Valentine's Day gifts. Every one of them addressed to Ava. None had ever been mailed. It was as though Daniel had continued buying presents, even after she had blocked him, waiting for the day. He believed she'd eventually come back. Daniel Mercer was arrested at 7:12 on a Monday morning. He didn't resist, he didn't run. He didn't even seem surprised when detectives knocked on his apartment door. He opened it before they had a chance to announce themselves. "I was wondering when you'd come." One detective asked if he understood why they were there. Daniel nodded. "It's about Ava." He said her name with a smile. Not the smile of someone hiding a crime. The smile of someone talking about a person they loved. Inside the interrogation room, detectives expected denial. Instead, Daniel answered almost every question. Yes, the notebook was his. Yes, he had followed Ava. Yes, he had photographed her. Yes, he had spent tens of thousands of dollars on her. Nothing about his answers suggested he believed he'd done anything wrong. One detective finally leaned forward. "Daniel, why were you following Ava?" Daniel looked genuinely confused. "I wasn't following her." The room fell silent. "You weren't." He shook his head. "I was making sure she was okay." The detective opened the notebook. "You wrote down where she went every day." "Yes." "You knew where she worked." "Yes." "You knew where she lived." "Yes." "You watched her for months without her knowing." Daniel frowned. "That's not how I'd describe it." The detective closed the notebook. "Then how would you describe it?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "I was looking after my girlfriend." Silence. The detective exchanged a glance with his partner. "Daniel, Ava wasn't your girlfriend." He smiled politely. "I know she told you that." "No. She wasn't. We've spoken to her." Daniel's smile slowly disappeared. "She was just scared." "Scared of what?" "Of what people would think." The detective felt something shift. This wasn't manipulation. This wasn't someone inventing excuses. Daniel genuinely believed what he was saying. He leaned forward. "You've read our messages." "Yes." "You've seen the gifts." "You've seen everything I did for her." "Yes." Daniel spread his hands. "Then you already know." "Know what?" "That we loved each other." The interrogation lasted almost 6 hours. Every answer revealed the same disturbing pattern. Whenever detectives mentioned something Ava had done, Daniel interpreted it completely differently. When she thanked him, he heard affection. When she accepted a gift, he saw commitment. When she apologized for being busy, he believed she was making time for him despite her schedule. Even blocking him didn't change his mind. One detective finally asked, "If Ava walked through that door right now, what do you think she'd say?" Daniel smiled. "She'd tell me she's sorry." The detective paused. "Sorry for what?" "For letting other people convince her to leave me." It was the first moment anyone in the room realized Daniel wasn't pretending. He wasn't lying. He wasn't creating excuses. He had built an entirely different reality inside his own mind. One where every act of kindness, every polite conversation, every thank you had become proof of a relationship that had never actually existed. Then the detective asked one final question. "Daniel, if Ava had agreed to meet you, what would have happened?" For the first time that day, Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the table, then quietly said, "I would have brought her home." "Your apartment?" He nodded. "We would have finally started our life together." "And if she wanted to leave?" Daniel looked up. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't aggressive. It was confused. Why would she want to leave? The room became completely silent, because everyone listening suddenly understood the same terrifying truth. Daniel had never planned to force Ava to stay. He simply couldn't imagine a world where she'd choose not to. As investigators continued searching Daniel's apartment, one question refused to go away. If Daniel truly believed Ava loved him, why had he been following her in secret? The answer was hidden inside a cardboard storage box beneath his bed. Unlike the notebooks, this box wasn't labeled. Inside were folded road maps, printed floor plans, camping equipment, a first aid kit, bottled water, canned food, a portable gas stove, blankets, and a handwritten checklist. At first, it looked like someone preparing for a weekend hiking trip. Then detectives noticed the title written across the top of the page. "When she's ready." Below it, a list. "Buy groceries. Fill the truck with fuel. Pack blankets. Bring medication. Bring an extra phone charger. Don't forget her favorite hot chocolate." One detective stopped reading. Another continued. The final item read, "She'll be scared at first. Be patient. Asterisk asterisk." There were no weapons, no handcuffs, no rope. Nothing suggesting Daniel planned to hurt anyone. Instead, everything suggested he believed he was preparing for a new beginning. Investigators later described it as one of the most disturbing discoveries in the case. Not because of what was inside the box, but because of what wasn't. There was no plan for violence, only a plan for a life that existed entirely inside Daniel's imagination. That same afternoon, police placed Ava under temporary protection. Officers advised her not to stream, not to return to her apartment alone, not to follow her normal routine. She packed a small suitcase and moved into Emily's guest room. For the first time in nearly 2 years, she finally felt safe. The phone rang. It wasn't Daniel. It was one of the detectives. His voice sounded unusually serious. "We've gone through Daniel's computer. And we found something." "What?" There was a pause. "He knew you blocked him." "I know." "No, you don't understand. He never tried contacting you again because he thought you already had." Ava frowned. "What are you talking about?" "We found hundreds of unsent messages." Her heart began to race. "Unsent?" "He wrote to you almost every day. Every morning, every night. For weeks. He never pressed send." Ava didn't understand. "Why?" Another pause. "Because according to his journal, he believed the conversations were happening in person." The investigators recovered more than 800 journal entries. Many read like ordinary diary pages. Ava seemed happier today. "We talked about moving somewhere quieter. She says she wants children one day." The problem was that none of those conversations had ever taken place. They existed only inside Daniel's notebooks. Page after page, he documented a relationship that had never happened. Arguments, apologies, birthdays, vacations they never took, plans they never made, entire conversations, written word for word, as if he genuinely remembered living them. A forensic psychologist later reviewed every notebook. His conclusion shocked investigators. Daniel wasn't simply fantasizing. He had gradually begun replacing reality with imagined memories. The longer Ava remained silent after blocking him, the more his mind filled those silent spaces with conversations of its own. In Daniel's world, the relationship had continued. Only now, it existed entirely inside his head. 3 days later, Ava was finally allowed to collect a few more belongings from her apartment. 2 officers escorted her upstairs. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been moved. She walked into the bedroom, opened the curtains, and froze. Across the street, in the apartment building opposite hers, one window faced directly into her living room. The blinds were open. Inside, police later discovered a folding chair, a pair of binoculars, a camera with a powerful zoom lens, and a rental agreement. The apartment had been leased 8 months earlier by Daniel Mercer. Daniel was denied bail. The judge cited the volume of evidence, the months of surveillance, the hidden apartment, the notebooks, the photographs, the risk to Ava. For the first time in nearly 2 years, there was a locked door between them. Ava should have felt relieved. Instead, she couldn't sleep. Not because Daniel was free. Because she finally understood how long she'd been watched without realizing it. Every walk to work, every coffee shop, every grocery run, every quiet afternoon she believed she was alone. She wasn't. That realization followed her everywhere. She stopped live streaming. She deleted most of her social media. She moved into another apartment. Changed her phone number. Even changed the route she took to work. Friends noticed she jumped whenever someone unexpectedly called her name. If footsteps echoed behind her, she automatically crossed the street. The investigation ended. The fear didn't. 6 months later, Daniel agreed to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. Doctors spent weeks interviewing him, reviewing his journals, listening to recordings from the interrogation. Their final report painted a disturbing picture. Daniel wasn't pretending. He genuinely believed he and Ava had shared an emotional relationship. Every unanswered message, his mind interpreted as temporary distance. Every gift, a symbol of commitment. Every polite reply, proof that she loved him. Whenever reality contradicted those beliefs, his brain quietly rewrote the memory until it fit the version he wanted to believe. It wasn't a sudden break from reality. It had happened gradually. One imagined conversation at a time. One imagined memory at a time. Until eventually the life inside his notebooks felt more real than the one everyone else was living. During one interview, a psychiatrist asked Daniel a simple question. When did you first fall in love with Ava? Daniel smiled. The day she thanked me. The doctor looked down at his notes. You mean during the live stream? Daniel shook his head. No. The day after. We talked for almost 3 hours. The psychiatrist searched the message records. There had been no conversation. No phone call. No emails. Nothing. Only silence. Daniel described those 3 hours in extraordinary detail. Where they supposedly talked. What they joked about. Even what Ava had been wearing. Every detail felt real to him. Except none of it had ever happened.